He did not wear a crown. He did not ride a war horse. He did not behead anyone in the town square. But when Leonardo da Vinci walked into a room, the entire world seemed to hold its breath, not because of what he said, but because no one could understand what he was saying. This was the man who sketched flying machines, while others were still sketching God. A man who described the precise flow of blood through the human heart, with nothing more than a goose feather and a divine level of loneliness. And while generations to come would praise him as a genius, the harsh truth of history is far colder. Leonardo wrote the future into his notebooks, only to be ignored by humanity for nearly 400 years. Before we open that backward-written notebook, if you are also curious about forgotten geniuses and secrets long buried from our school books, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, not to chase numbers, but to make sure you do not miss a single page of history that someone once chose to fold shut. Because the story you are about to hear is not about Leonardo. It is about us, and the reason why for centuries we still have not been smart enough to understand him. The man who wrote backwards, sketched the future, and left history speechless. The year was 1487. A man with tangled hair and a contemplative face sat alone in a cold stone room in Milan. On the table before him lay a sheet of paper, a goose feather quill, and what the world would later call a map of the future. But the strangest thing was not the sketch of the flying machine, it was the way he wrote. Backwards, each letter flowing from right to left as if written for a mirror or for God. The question is, who was he speaking to, and why was he not speaking to his own time? Leonardo da Vinci, master painter, father of the Mona Lisa, a man whose legacy was hijacked by Hollywood through a best-selling fantasy novel. But the most astonishing thing about Leonardo is not found on canvas. It is hidden in his notebooks, over 7,000 pages of handwritten thoughts, diagrams, designs, and musings. And every single page was written in reverse. Not because he was left-handed, not to look cool, but because the world he lived in did not deserve to read it. These were not diary entries like "Today I ate pasta." These notebooks, known as codices, were where Leonardo recorded everything: helicopter designs, studies of hydraulics, dissections of human corpses, love poetry, blueprints for weapons of mass destruction, and even grocery lists. These codices were like the living hard drives of a mind that never shut down, running 24/7 in a world that had no electricity. The terrifying part: most of what he drew and imagined in those pages no one could understand. Not because it was wrong, but because it came too early. A giant parachute drawn in the year 1495, capturing aerodynamics long before Newton. A tank with interlocking gears and a rotating cannon turret, tested only in the 20th century. An automatic weaving machine which, had it been built, might have launched the Industrial Revolution 3 centuries ahead of schedule. Leonardo was not guessing. He observed, he dissected, he experimented, and then he hid it. He did not publish. He did not share it with the Pope or the Royal Academies. He did not start a company to raise money for building a flying parachute. He simply wrote it all down and locked it away, as if he were writing letters to a world that did not yet exist. A world that would be smart enough to read them, but not during his lifetime. You might think this is the tragedy of a misunderstood genius, but no, it is more complicated than that. Leonardo worked for princes, warlords, and the mafia families of the Renaissance. He painted for churches, but he also designed machines meant to kill, tools of destruction for local wars. He understood power and the cruelty that came with it. Perhaps he knew if he truly built a flying machine, it would not soar for science. It would fly to drop stones on the village next door. So he sketched, and then he hid. Some say Leonardo was a painter. Others call him a scientist. But perhaps most accurately, he was the first man to know too much in a world not yet ready to understand. And that is why he wrote backwards, so history would have to look into a mirror once it became wise enough to read. Why did we discover these notebooks so late? Why did it take 400 years after his death for them to be decoded, printed, scanned, and auctioned? Why was it not until 1994 that Bill Gates spent $30 million on a single copy? Perhaps because we were too busy building guns, fighting wars, launching the Industrial Revolution, then the Internet Revolution, to realize Leonardo had done it all. By hand. In a room with no Wi-Fi. In a world that did not know how to listen. Now imagine this, you write a book every day for 30 years. No one reads it. No one cares. You die. 4 centuries later, someone digs up your manuscript, and then they realize everything they just invented yesterday, you had already written in the 15th century. Does that hurt? Or was that the plan? Because at the end of each backward written page, Leonardo left no message. No line that read, "Remember me or I was right and you were fools." No will, no declaration. Only drawings. Silent. Pristine. So beautiful, they chill the spine. And that is what left history speechless. Leonardo did not try to leave a legacy. He left a question. And that question is, if a man understands everything but no one understands him, does that make him a genius or a warning? The brain with no off switch. Inside Leonardo's sleepless world. Imagine being trapped inside a mind with no pause button, no off switch, and nothing but a stream of thoughts powered by 10,000 hyper-caffeinated hamsters. Welcome to the brain of Leonardo da Vinci, a place where everything is a question, and every question splits into 3 more, and those 3 each give birth to a sketch. Leonardo did not think linearly like most people. He did not think I am painting a picture, or I am studying water. He thought in chaotic domino chains. If water bends, then hair must bend too. If hair bends, then I can sketch movement. If I can sketch movement, then I can understand the human body. If I understand the human body, can I redesign it? And then, boom. A sketch of the human anatomy appears right next to a drawing of waves crashing against a seawall. Some call Leonardo a polymath. Wrong. He was an entire living ecosystem of intellect. Inside him was a whole army of imaginary Google Drives powered by imagination, where no idea lived in isolation, they dueled constantly in his mind. And when no one could answer his questions, Leonardo became the professor, the student, the lab, and the ethics board, all by himself. Take this example, he observed water flowing through rocks. At the time, no one thought this had anything to do with the human body. Leonardo, on the other hand, sketched the movement and merged it with his anatomical drawings of the circulatory system. Because blood in his mind flowed just like rivers. The result, a model of human anatomy so accurate modern medicine would not fully appreciate it for another 500 years. And that was just something he drew for fun. On another day, Leonardo watched birds flapping their wings. He did not just see beautiful wings. He calculated force-weight wing angles and drop speeds. He translated that motion into mechanical diagrams. And from those he sketched a flying machine. Not just one, dozens. Some had flapping wings. Others had gears, push rods, simulated bird-like movements. All of them were theoretically functional if only the world had invented lightweight materials by then. You know what is strange? Leonardo did not need to know aerodynamic theory. He saw force. He saw sound. He saw time as if it materialized right before his eyes, and then he drew it. No university, no PhD, no YouTube tutorial titled How to build a flying machine with goat leather and sheer madness, just instinct, and a brain that refused to sleep. We call him a genius as a way to simplify our fear, a fear that there are people who do not quite belong to our species. People like Leonardo do not need to be inspired. They are the inspiration 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and that makes them more exhausted than anyone else. Leonardo never took a day off, not because he was hardworking, but because ideas would not leave him alone. His notebooks are often filled with scribbled reminders like, must redraw the motion of a frog's lower jaw, or study why a cat's eyes reflect light, or explore whether a cannon could run on steam. If you think these questions were just for fun, you are right. Right in the way only someone could be whose idea of entertainment was dissecting a corpse just to accurately sketch the central nervous system. Leonardo once wrote, "Learning without applying is like eating without digesting." A perfect quote for Instagram. But when you place it next to hand-drawn diagrams of a dead man's heart or a robotic drummer, then you realize he meant it, and he applied it. Every time Leonardo grew curious, a new world was born, and that world did not sleep. It gave birth to sketches. Sketches gave birth to questions. Questions led to reflection. Reflection led to isolation. People admired him. But no one could live like him. A nobleman once hired Leonardo to paint a portrait. A year later, there was still no painting, but Leonardo had submitted blueprints for an optimized citywide drainage system, along with a flood-resistant water wheel, and a 5-act play no one could understand. When asked why the painting was not finished, Leonardo replied, "I am studying the nature of water. Once I understand it, I will paint it more truthfully." The result, the painting never got done. But Milan ended up with a better sewage system than Paris. And that is what made him different. Leonardo did not make art. He lived inside it. He did not paint the world. He decoded it. And once he had decoded it, he quietly wrote it all backwards, like a final message for those patient enough to read. The question is, are you sure you are sane enough to understand the mind of a man it took history 4 centuries to even begin to read? Because in the next chapter, we are entering truly dangerous territory, weapons of war, and the reason why a man who hated violence still designed machines of annihilation 400 years before Hitler. Inventions no one dared to build, because they were either too mad or too real. They say Leonardo was an artist. Then why do half of his sketches look like they could wipe out a town using nothing but water pressure and a few gears? While Renaissance painters of his time were busy adding blush to the cheeks of the Virgin Mary, Leonardo was sketching a design for a self-loading cannon that used a sliding mechanism to fire in rapid succession and looked disturbingly similar to the Gatling gun, which would not be invented for another 350 years. Do not believe it? Look up multi-barrel machine gun Da Vinci. But before you do, ask yourself, why would a man who despised war spend hundreds of hours designing tools for mass killing? The answer is simple. Leonardo was a genius, but his time was not. And like any noir anti-hero, Leonardo understood one cold rule. If you do not control power, power will crush you. So he chose to control it. Let us begin with the tank designed in the year 1485. It looked like a giant wooden turtle shell surrounded by cannons. It could rotate 360 degrees moved by gears and was operated from the inside. This was not a fantasy. With enough lightweight steel and a powerful engine, it could have worked. But Leonardo deliberately sabotaged the gear mechanism. That is right. He broke his own design. Like a scientist ahead of his time, but not willing to let that time have guns. And that was not the only time. In his sketch of the multi-directional mortar, He outlined a system where cannons could adjust their firing angles in real time, a concept now used in modern long-range artillery. But once again, he never built it. He simply drew it, took notes, then closed the notebook. An instantly collapsible suspension bridge designed to be assembled, rigged with explosives, and detonated with compressed force. A siege ladder with an automatic folding mechanism. A robotic arm capable of lifting weights. A human-powered submarine, and in that same notebook he wrote, "I will not reveal how it works for men, would use it to slaughter one another beneath the sea." At this point, you start to feel that something is off. But not with him. With us. Leonardo did not invent weapons to sell them. He designed them as if to say, "This is what you could do, but maybe you should not." A kind of mockery of power delivered through its own instruments. Remember this, Leonardo once wrote a letter applying for a job with Duke Sforza, a warlord known for his cold-blooded ruthlessness. And the letter did not begin with, "I am a painter," but rather, "I can design every kind of weapon from siege towers to flood bridges. If there is time, I also know how to paint." This was not humility. This was how Leonardo survived in a world where art could not feed anyone but weapons fed everyone. Was it a bit sarcastic? Yes. But it was also chillingly practical. Leonardo's world was no place for dreamers. It was an arena, one filled with noblemen ready to toss each other's heads into the streets for land, with inquisitions ready to burn you alive for saying the wrong thing, and with a system where geniuses were treated like nail technicians only called upon during public holidays. Leonardo understood that well, so he drew. He drew like a man who knew the truth, but dared not speak it aloud. Each sketch was a warning disguised as art. Sound familiar, just like today's hackers who test a system by breaking in to prove how vulnerable it is. Leonardo was a Renaissance-era hacker. But instead of crashing the system, he simply left behind the code and walked away. Now imagine living in that world. You could invent flying machines, tunneling devices, submarines, but you had no materials, no technology, and most importantly, no faith that the world would use any of it wisely. What would you do if you were Leonardo? You would write it backwards, hide it in a notebook, lock it in a box, leave it for the future to find. When, and only when, it was worthy of opening. And that is the most frightening part. Not that Leonardo was brilliant, but that he understood humanity too well. A man who is good at math builds a cannon. A man who understands people builds a cannon and hides it. Think about that before we move on to the next part. Because part 4 is not about machines, it is about people. About the falconers of the Renaissance, those who slept little, lived quietly, and gave their lives to train a single bird. Or more precisely, about Leonardo. Because for over 30 years, he did nothing else but tame a beast, his own mind. And do you know what? That beast had no leash. It flew free, and it left a trail behind. Leonardo, the falconer of his own mind. You think being a genius is a blessing. Try training a bird of prey without a leash. Now replace that bird with your own brain, and instead of 3 months of training, imagine 30 years without rest, without reward. Just you, your imagination, and a world that constantly has no idea what the hell you are doing. Leonardo da Vinci was one of the rare few who not only thought too much, but had no way to shut the thinking off. Every idea was bait. Every discovery a breakthrough, but also a door that opened 10 more traps of curiosity. And like a falconer leading his hawk out into the misty morning fields, Leonardo led his own mind out of bed each day, not to hunt for food, but to hunt for truth. You see him draw a rotary wing design, Next to it, a diagram of the human vascular system. Beneath that, a flow map of the Tiber River. And beside it, a sketch of a crying eye. You might think he had ADHD. He did not. He was an ecosystem without a center because everything was connected. The human body, water currents, bird wings, lever mechanisms. For Leonardo, all of it was a physics equation and a visual poem. But none of it came easily, and certainly not gently. Leonardo had no laboratory, no research grant, no National Innovation Fund of Italy. Everything he did, from dissecting corpses in hospital basements at midnight to measuring the flecks of damp wood under varying pressure, he did alone. No one forced him, and no one helped. The terrifying part, he did not know how to stop. In one notebook entry, written in small, slanted letters, he scribbled, "Each time I close my eyes, I see water flowing muscles, sliding forces in motion. They do not let me sleep." What do you see in that genius or the early diagnosis of a mind overstimulated into insomnia? Remember, this was the man who mapped out the anatomy of the female uterus based on his own dissections. No one asked for it. No one reviewed it. He did it because he wanted to know. And that is the problem. Most people get curious and move on. Leonardo got curious and became obsessed. When you spend your youth trying to understand how a bird's wing creates lift, but the world around you is asking, is it done yet? When will the Duke's cousin get her portrait? You are not just lonely. You start to question your own sanity. And he did. Leonardo constantly scolded himself for not finishing enough. He wandered between half-finished paintings, incomplete machines, and unfinished blueprints. The nobles sighed. The patrons cut funding. And Leonardo. He wrote in his journal, "He who begins many things but finishes none is lying to his own intelligence." A slap from within. The world celebrates him for the Mona Lisa, but he hated the Mona Lisa not because it was a bad painting, but because it was not perfect. And Leonardo could not tolerate imperfection. He revised it for 16 years and never delivered it to the person who commissioned it. When he died, the painting was still at his home. And you think he was stubborn? No. It was the curse of being absolute. When you see every connection in the universe from the angle of a nose bridge to the structure of a double rainbow, you cannot half do anything. You cannot paint a smile without understanding the facial muscles. You cannot build a flying machine without decoding the flight mechanism of an insect. So you repeat. Every line, every stroke, every experiment, until the world calls you a genius. While all you want is to sleep through the night without dreaming of vascular maps. Leonardo was not happy. That is something few talk about, and he did not need to be. Because he did not live for personal joy. He lived like a data recorder programmed from the future. His job was to observe, analyze, and archive. What to do with it, that was for the future to decide. That is why he wrote backwards, sketched in code, took notes in visual metaphors, as if he already knew that most people of his time were not yet capable of understanding. The question is, why did he keep doing it? Because not doing it would drive him mad. When you are a falconer training a wild predator, you cannot stop halfway. The bird will fly away, and you will be left with nothing. For Leonardo, that bird was his mind. Every day he did not train, it was a day he risked being consumed by it. His hunger for understanding was not a passion. It was the only medicine that kept him sane. You think those notebook collections were meant to show off? No. They were chains. The way he tethered his mind to the ground so it would not fly away and take him with it. And that is why he never finished anything. Because a good falconer knows sometimes the bird is not meant to be kept. It is meant to be released. And Leonardo released it. Into the future. Into us. Are you ready to enter the next chapter? Because now we leave his mind and turn to how the world saw him. A man who drew corpses like he was painting angels, who hid his notebooks like ancient martial arts scrolls, who left behind the most revolutionary technology in a drawer that stayed closed for 400 years. If you are still listening, chances are you are not just curious. You are being pulled into a world where genius is not glory, but loneliness, in a time that never quite understood. If what you just heard made you think, question, or even just want to hear more, go ahead and follow this channel. And leave a comment. I would truly love to know what you think and where in the world you are listening from. When genius gets seen, and humanity leaves the message on read. There is a chilling truth in history. Many of the greatest things were once thrown in the trash. The life of Leonardo da Vinci was a chain of unfinished projects, and even his legacy nearly ended up wrapping fish. Let us begin with a picture. It is 1519. Leonardo dies in a small castle in France. He has no wife, no children, no university named after him during his lifetime. In his room are thousands of pages filled with backward writing sketches of machines, anatomical studies, cryptic notes, designs for collapsing bridges, submarines, hydraulic systems, all gathered into thick, weathered notebooks. And do you know what happened to them? His nephew sold part of the collection to pay off debts. Another part was used as covers for accounting ledgers. Some were broken apart. Others went missing. Some pages were even cut out and hung on walls as decorative artwork. Yes, you heard that right. Designs for the 21st century, once beneath Leonardo's fingertips, were left on scene by history. Not because they were flawed, but because the world back then had no API to read Da Vinci files. It is like sending an email with Tesla blueprints in the year 1460 to a world that had just figured out how to boil water. Even sadder, the people who truly understood Leonardo, or at least partially, did not live until 3 or 4 centuries after him. Not until the 19th century did scientists begin to say, "Oh, this sketch is a helicopter. Oh, this one is a robot. Oh, this is the first accurate model of the human circulatory system," which means for hundreds of years, humanity wandered in circles around something that had already been drawn and never realized it. Another example, his design for a mobile suspension bridge. If built according to Leonardo's sketches, it could have helped troops cross rivers swiftly during wartime. But it was never used. And over 300 years later, the French invented it without knowing they were simply assembling Da Vinci's old Lego set. Still not enough sarcasm. Let us talk about the Codex Leicester, one of Leonardo's most complete surviving notebooks. It floated through the hands of nobles, scholars, merchants, and then disappeared. Until 1994, when Bill Gates, yes, that Bill bought it for $30.8 million United States dollars. That was the moment humanity finally scanned Leonardo's manuscripts into a computer and projected his sketches as digital presentations in a museum in Seattle. 500 years. From ink on parchment, to a dusty drawer, to the hands of the Microsoft Titan, to an LCD screen. Leonardo never got to see it. He never got to know that he was right. And that was history's apology delivered in the most emotionless way possible. Have you ever sent a long, heartfelt message and been left on scene for 5 years? Leonardo was left on scene for 500. And instead of getting a reply, he was simply tagged as the forgotten genius. Sounds poetic. But really, it is a historical insult. We beat our chests over our technology, our machines, our AI, our drumming robots in concerts. But Leonardo drew a clockwork drumming robot back in 1495. It had joints, gears, a spring mechanism. It worked. It was the first humanoid machine ever designed. And we ignored it. Back then, that robot was not included in the history of technology, not taught, not credited as a foundation. It was just an old sketch in a notebook, written backwards. Do you see the tragedy? Leonardo never needed to be praised, but he deserved to be understood. And humanity, once finally mature enough to decode what he wrote, was too busy with war, the Industrial Revolution, the internet, TikTok, to actually sit down and read his pages. We did not betray Leonardo out of hatred. We betrayed him with silence. And in history, nothing kills a genius faster than a world that refuses to read their notes. Now, do you think this is where the story ends? No. Because part 6 is where history has to confront its own wounded ego. It is when Leonardo's designs are no longer just sketches, but actually get built. It is when the future finally begins to listen to Leonardo. And the irony. It started with a man in a blue sweater holding Windows 95. Bill Gates, a drumming robot, and the historical plot twist of 1994. In 1994, a man in glasses and a sea blue sweater walked into a Sotheby's auction in New York. He carried no sword, wore no crown, had no royal court behind him. Only a pen and a number, 30.8 million United States dollars. And then, in a strange moment, that even Leonardo himself could never have predicted the future, finally opened the notebook he had left behind. That man was Bill Gates. What he bought was the Codex Leicester, the most famous notebook of Leonardo da Vinci, not because it was beautiful, but because it was the closest thing humanity has ever owned to a handwritten API from God. Inside this notebook, Leonardo wrote about everything from the vortex motion of water to light refraction, to how crescent moons form, to how to build a dam without destroying an entire ecosystem. And he wrote it all backwards, as if to ensure that only those who were patient enough, arrogant enough, or bored enough would even try to decode it. Bill Gates did not buy the Codex Leicester just to frame it in his office. He scanned every page, then turned it into a digital slideshow and projected it in public exhibitions around the world. As if to say to humanity, remember this guy. Now go back and actually read what he wrote. And the world began to read. No one called Leonardo the painter who never finished anything anymore. They called him a physicist, a hydraulics engineer, an astronomer, a neuroscientist, a military designer, an architect, a critic of time itself. All of that contained within one man and a single pen. This is when the wildest part of his notebooks began to surface. In his sketch of the drumming robot, yes, you heard that right, a robot that plays drums, Leonardo described in detail how a system of gears, pulleys, and springs could power a mechanical arm capable of drumming to rhythm. It had shoulders, elbows, wrist joints, movable pins. It was the first programmable robot design in recorded history. 1495. For comparison, the first modern automatic machine, considered the ancestor of robotics, was created 450 years later. How is that for a soft roast of modern times? If Leonardo had silicon chips, servo motors, and a truckload of parts from Shenzhen, he might have finished building Boston Dynamics during the Renaissance. But it was not just mechanics. Leonardo once modeled human dance movements using mathematics. He wrote that every muscle in the body is a lever, and every motion a physical consequence. And then he drew the entire sequence like he was debugging the human body in ink. In other words, while his descendants were lining up for TED Talks about biotech and AI, Leonardo was hand-drawing the entire system from scratch, with no AI to assist him. And now the most astonishing part, everything he drew is plausible. No longer mad theories. No longer just beautiful drawings. Modern researchers have started reconstructing 3D models from Leonardo's sketches. And what they have found is this: they work. With the right materials, the right force, and a bit of mechanical help, what Leonardo put into those notebooks could become real. Starting to feel a chill, a man who lived before Edison, before Tesla, before Newton, with no computer, no microscope, no lab, only his eyes, his hands, and a brain that refused to sleep. And he reconstructed the future, then hid it. Someone once asked if Leonardo was so great, why did no one know about him for centuries? The answer is painfully simple: because we never read his notebooks. We were too busy waging wars, too busy burning witches, too busy redrawing maps, too busy reinventing what he had already drawn. Now when a tech company buys his notebooks and beams them through 4K projectors, humanity finally realizes it has been sitting on a treasure trove, using it as scratch paper. One of Leonardo's drawings was once cut in half to bind a 17th century farmer's ledger, another smudged with fish ink because it was used to wrap food. That is not tragedy. That is a plot twist. A genius left behind the blueprints to save the future, and the future used them to wrap a fish sandwich. Welcome to humanity. And here's the most terrifying part: Leonardo was not angry. He never wrote, "These fools will regret it." He never cursed. He just kept writing, backwards, steadily, until the day he died, as if he knew it is all right. One day you will find it, and when you do, I will not need to say anything anymore. And he was right. Bill Gates projected his drawings. Engineers began building 3D prototypes. Educators started adding Leonardo to STEM curriculums. And Leonardo, somewhere in the dusty folds of history, simply smiled. Finally, they turned the lights on. You think the story ends here? Not yet. Because the final chapter, Part 7, will no longer be about Leonardo. It will be about us. About the people living in the age of AI drones and deepfakes, yet still ignoring genius. About how the falconry of intelligence continues, but this time without Leonardo holding the leash. Are you ready? Because the next part will ask you a question that history has never been able to answer. Have we truly earned the right to understand Leonardo, the man who wrote for the future in a world that could not read? If you have ever picked up one of Leonardo's notebooks and found it hard to understand, congratulations. You are exactly who he wrote it for. Not the nobility, not the church, not the city council of Florence demanding he finish a duchess's portrait, but you. The one living in the 21st century with all the devices, data, and light, and still struggling to answer the questions Leonardo once asked. And maybe that is exactly how he wanted it. Do you know why Leonardo wrote backwards? Some say it was to hide his work. Others claim it was because he was left-handed. Some historians call it just a habit. But there is another theory more frightening, more profound, and more convincing. He wrote backwards because the world he lived in was already backwards. In a society that built churches taller than schools, killed people in the name of religion, and treated questioning as heresy, Leonardo did not want to be heard. Not because he was afraid, but because he knew they were not ready to understand. He did not fight his era. He simply wrote for the next one. And that is where you, the viewer, the reader, the one who thinks genius is something locked in the past, must face yourself. Because now the question is no longer, how smart was Leonardo? It is, how long have we been this stupid? You think we live in the age of understanding. Yes, we have the internet. We have AI. We can access the sum of human knowledge with a single click. And yet, in this very age, we still misunderstand basic science. Still let conspiracy theories spread faster than vaccines. Still trust live stream crystal sellers more than medical data. Still treat genius as a symbol instead of a warning. We share Mona Lisa memes, but never read Leonardo's mechanical manuscripts. We print his quotes on t-shirts, but never sit for 5 minutes to understand why he analyzed every human joint like a precision machine. We are doing exactly what the 16th century did, worshipping genius with laziness. Leonardo did not leave a legacy. He left a challenge. And most of humanity, even with 5 more centuries, satellites, laboratories, and even ChatGPT still has not caught up. Just look at how we treat modern-day geniuses. Scientists fired for speaking the truth too soon. Inventors pushed out of the system because they refused to follow the structure of pitch, raise capital, monetize, IPO. Climate activists from the 1980s dismissed as paranoid. Do you think Leonardo would be welcomed if he lived today? Or would he be flagged as content disordered, have his channel shut down for going against the trend, and be told to simplify his message to make it more viral? We say we want genius. But we cannot handle the mirror it holds up to our face. Leonardo did not leave behind tutorial videos. He did not create a newsletter. He did not go live. He left pages, written backwards, with no key. Because he knew if you are not ready to learn, then you do not deserve to know. The terrifying thing is, he was not wrong. Today we live in an age of overwhelming information and a starvation of patience. We read faster, but understand less. We want everything explained in 15 seconds, but shy away from truths that require a lifetime of contemplation. Leonardo could not survive in a world like this, and maybe he knew that. So he did not come. He just left a notebook, a codex, not as a treasure, but as a test, a log, an echo, a quiet reminder. This is what the human mind was once capable of, without tools, without instructions, without approval. So you, the one who now has all of those things, what have you created? The world does not need another Leonardo. Because if we had one, we would ignore him all over again, just like we ignored the first. Or maybe this is simply an invitation to open a notebook and actually read it. For real. For the first time. If you have listened this far, then perhaps you are not just hearing a story, you are remembering what it feels like to see the world through different eyes. And that is exactly what we are doing here. The next stories will go deeper, get stranger, and might even make you question history itself. If you are ready to keep going, hit subscribe. Not for the algorithm, but because your curiosity deserves to be fed.